All right, everyone. Welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. My name is Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. For more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the QEM Heroes Initiative. The Heroes program brings together experienced researchers who have worked in federal agencies to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. Our goal is to build sustainable ecosystems for STEM research and education at colleges and universities across the country, not just those with large federal funding portfolios. We hope this series promotes engagement with our Heroes Fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. During the webinar, please use the Q&A tool to ask questions of the panelists. We'll monitor and answer questions during the webinar as time allows. Once the presentation is over, we will moderate a discussion and give attendees the opportunity to raise their hands and ask questions live. I'm happy to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Joseph Isaac has spent the past 20 years as a STEM educator, ambassador, and connector among underrepresented populations and communities, both domestically and globally. His experience includes previous roles at the U.S. National Science Foundation, the Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellowship, Education Development Center, District of Columbia Public Schools, and Howard University. Dr. Josh Trapani is a geoscientist who has spent the past 20 years working in federal science policy. His experience includes past roles at the U.S. National Science Foundation and the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics on Capitol Hill and with the Association of American Universities, a higher education association focused on federal advocacy on research and higher education issues. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to our presenters today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. I'm going
Thank you.
to share my screen. Can find that. Okay. So the way that Joseph and I are going to split up the presentation is I'm going to give an overview and some context around the broader impacts criterion, and then Joseph will talk about some more specific examples. So I just want to be clear from the get-go that what I'm going to talk about, it's not a training for how to prepare your own broader impact statement. Most of what I'll be talking about is at a higher level to give some context for what broader impacts are all about, where it comes from, why it matters, as well as some framing for how to think about it. So I'll be talking about the history and purpose of NSF's broader impacts, talk about categories of broader impacts, and look at some of the agency guidance around it. Provide some policy context for broader impacts. And then I have a slide at the end that has a lot of links to a lot of the different resources that I referenced. So you will have those if you wish to pursue them further. I have a little disclaimer of my own at the bottom of this slide, which is just that all of the views that I am going to express here are my own personal views. I'm not representing any part of the government or anybody but myself in terms of what I say here. So I wanted to start with NSF's mission as laid out in the 1950 Act that established the agency, promote the progress of science, advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and secure the national defense. If you think about it, it is a little peculiar to group these three things. How is the progress of science related to these other objectives? And that connection is kind of what I'm going to talk about. So what I wanted to do was introduce what people call the linear model of science. And I know a lot of you are probably familiar with this already. It is the basic idea that if you take resources such as taxpayer money and you use it to fund basic research across fields, you'll develop a reservoir of knowledge that can then be put to use in a more applied form and ultimately will lead to a range of societal benefits, economic, environmental, medical, industrial, technological, and so on. Over time, the linear model has been pretty widely critiqued. I didn't put it up here as a straw man or to tear it down, just to basically highlight that there is one part in particular that we really do not understand very well. And that is this right here, where the research is translated into societal impacts. And yet, NSF, by virtue of its mission, needs not just to fund science, but to encourage the development of these societal benefits. As I was researching some of the history of this, I came upon a great quote that I think sums it up. Being an intermediary between federal research policy and the basic research community has, excuse me, at times placed the NSF in a difficult position. This tension is illustrated by the history of NSF's efforts to broaden the impact of the research that it funds. So I wanted to start by talking about the history of broader impacts because it shows how these challenges have played out over time, and it also gives some good context and perspective for the things that are happening now. So right from the beginning, NSF has used expert review to evaluate proposals. And also right from the beginning, there have been more requests for funding than there is actual money to fund them. So the evaluation of proposals requires specific criteria, and those criteria have always included non-technical factors beyond scientific merit. And I put here just a few of the terms that have been used over time to describe things that are sort of similar to what we consider broader impacts now. So relation to national effort in the 1950s, educational value and relevance to proposed applications, utility or relevance. There are a number of these that cycle through the criteria over time. In 1986, NSF began using the term merit review rather than peer review to describe its proposal evaluation process. And part of this was due to the fact that they were basically acknowledging the systematic inclusion of broader criteria beyond scientific merit in what was being used to evaluate the proposals. In 1997, NSF formalized its two merit review criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts. These are the same two that they use today. This was done partially in response to the Government Performance and Response Act, what people call GPRA. GPRA mandated program evaluation to improve performance and public accountability at federal agencies, and part of this is part of what led NSF to streamline its criteria to these two. In 2010, the America Competes Reauthorization Act laid out specific objectives for broader impacts, required a policy, and had some other aspects that essentially codified broader impacts, put it into law. Over the last 15 years, there's been a slew of activities to help PIs better understand and respond to broader impacts. There has been a growing academic literature that evaluates and is sometimes critical of broader impacts, and the formation of communities devoted to sharing resources and best practices, such as the Center for Advancing Research Impact in Society. And then two things of note that have happened just over the past year. In April of 2025, NSF released a statement on updated priorities, and one of the things that it addressed was broader impacts in the context of broadening participation activities. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then finally, at the end of last year, the National Science Board, which is the governing board of NSF, their Commission on Merit Review released a report called NSF Merit Review for a Changing Landscape. It included the recommendation to rename broader impacts to societal benefits. And as we just discussed, that would actually require Congress because the name broader impacts is in statute. And to emphasize the imperative to both promote the progress of science and engineering and deliver societal benefits from NSF-funded research and education. So one big emphasis of this report was the importance of broader impacts and the need for NSF-funded research to bring about benefits for society. So now let's take a look at what might be included in broader impacts. I think many people may not realize just how diverse the objectives are. This is from the America Competes Reauthorization Act of 2010, as we talked about, as amended. So these are set in law, and there are seven here, seven potential objectives: increasing economic competitiveness, advancing health and welfare, supporting national defense, enhancing partnerships, developing an American STEM workforce, and this part includes K through 12 STEM education, teacher development, and undergraduate STEM education, improving scientific literacy and engagement of the public, and expanding participation of women and individuals from underrepresented groups in STEM. So what this means is a PI thinking about broader impacts can choose one of these, multiple of these categories, or even think of other categories. There are a lot of ways that scientific research can potentially have benefits for society. So let's take a look at what NSF's own guidance has to say. The language I'm about to show you comes from NSF's Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, or what we call the PAPG. This part touches on what actually needs to be in the proposal submitted to NSF. So it says that the broader impacts may be accomplished through the research itself, through activities directly related to research projects, or through activities that are supported by but complementary to the project. And then it references these examples of outcomes, and what it's talking about are the 7 examples that we just looked at on the previous slide, should not be considered either comprehensive or prescriptive. Proposers may include appropriate outcomes not covered by these examples. So that means you can choose one of the 7, multiple of the 7, or even something that's not in the 7. There is a lot of discretion here. I also wanted to identify one other piece of language in the PAPG. NSF projects in the aggregate should contribute more broadly to achieving societal goals, even if assessment of broader impacts outcomes for particular projects is done at an aggregated level. PIs are expected to be accountable for carrying out the activities described in the funded project. The reason why I wanted to surface this language is to highlight the distinction between a PI planning broader impacts at the project level and NSF's expectation of evaluating them at the aggregate level. I think this is just my opinion, like everything else. Implicit here is an acknowledgement of the uncertainty of the outcomes of the research that NSF funds. I think what they're also trying to do very subtly is discourage people from overhyping the potential broader impacts of their own individual research project. And the aggregate point here is really interesting too, because I think it says something about how the agency expects to evaluate and articulate the impacts of the research it funds. And I'm going to come back to that point in a few minutes. So I next wanted to touch on the statement and update on agency priorities that NSF released last year. Let me just read this part to you. It's about broadening participation and broader impacts. From the FAQ on the page, can I still propose broadening participation activities in fulfillment of the broader impacts criterion? The answer reads in part, investigators should prioritize the first 6 broader impacts goals. These again were the 7 that we looked at. Investigators wishing to address goal 7, expanding participation in STEM for women and underrepresented groups, must ensure that all outreach, recruitment, or participatory activities in NSF projects are open and available to all Americans. There is a lot of confusion about broader impacts and broadening participation. Some of it predates the events of the last year. I think the very similar terminology of the two has not helped. So it's important to clarify that relationship between the two. As we saw in a previous slide with the types of broader impacts, broadening participation is an important element that falls under broader impacts. It's there in legislation as a type of broader impact, but it's not the only element nor a mandatory element. There are other parts of NSF that focus on broadening participation. I'm speaking specifically within broader impacts. There is a longer FAQ on NSF's website that talks about protected and non-protected characteristics and different types of activities. And I've got links to all of that at the end, as I mentioned. But if others have information or knowledge to add about these issues, I think maybe during the Q&A we can surface that or how we're handling these changes. One last thing from NSF before we turn to the broader policy context, and then I will wrap up and turn it over to Joseph. In 2021, the Assistant Director of the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate released a broader impacts framework for proposals that I think is really interesting and a thoughtful way to approach broader impacts. He released it through a Dear Colleague letter. And it says, the challenge in broader impacts is to connect fundamental research outcomes to quality of life improvements for others, despite uncertainty. And the suggestion is that PIs focus on a reasonable and honest assessment of possible and likely outcomes rather than on the probability of specific outcomes. So the framework is there are essentially two basic elements of outcomes that are most likely to be relevant to broader impacts from a research project. The first is scientific opportunities, so things like workshops or new partnerships, tools that get developed, or community engagement. There are other examples. And the second category would be communicative products, excuse me. So that would include journal articles, but a wide range of other types of products too. Posters, books, podcasts, videos, even research data. And what they suggest is that there are three questions that you can use to connect the elements to critical problems. The first question is, who can the scientific opportunities and communicative products empower? So who are the potential users of the things that come out of the science that people are doing? Whose quality of life can the empowerment improve? So if someone is empowered to solve a problem through the science, that that solving of the problem, who does that help? Who benefits from that? And then finally, what actions make these broader impacts more likely? What is it that I can propose to do? The idea is if the PIs think through these questions and apply them to those two elements, they'll come up with broader impacts that are realistic, make sense, and meet NSF's bar. And I just thought this was an interesting thing to present because broader impacts can be so nebulous. I also think that that framework is helpful as we begin to talk about the broader policy context. So it has long been popular for elected politicians to go after what they perceive as government waste. And scientific research is often a target of these efforts. Starting with Senator William Proxmire's Golden Fleece Awards in the 1970s, there have been many members of Congress who have gone after spending that they consider to be silly or wasteful. So we have James Lankford's Federal Fumbles, Joni Ernst's Make 'em Squeal, Tom Coburn's Wastebook. There are other examples. We can relate this fear that the government is wasting taxpayer money on frivolous handouts for scientific research back to the linear model that I showed at the beginning. The implication here is that the money is going in one end and it's taxpayers' money, but the societal benefits are not coming out the other end, at least not to the degree that we would hope for or expect. So the advocacy community, by which I mean associations, scientific societies, and even though it's not part of the advocacy community, NSF itself has responded to these attacks by showing that even studies that may sound silly or frivolous can be important and lead to societal benefits. So we have here NSF's responses on its website to all of these different congressional waste books. Some of you will be familiar already with the Golden Goose Award, which is a sort of a counter to the Golden Fleece Award. And these here, the Scientific Inquirer, I worked on these when I was at the Association of American Universities, and they were set up to be sort of like supermarket tabloid form, but basically to explain why silly sounding science was not silly. And you can see we featured on one of the issues here the poster child for silly sounding science, which is the shrimp on the treadmill, which actually there's some real reason for funding this study. Importantly here, no one is really arguing about specifically the scientific merits of the work. They're arguing about whether it delivers some sort of value or benefit outside the scientific community, and the intensity of these critiques has grown. And they're now joined by more subtle critiques that the system isn't efficient, it's hopelessly biased, it's too conservative, and other critiques. Some of these more subtle critiques actually are not without some merit. So this is the milieu in which NSF is increasingly emphasizing the importance of broader impacts. So all this raises the question, how does NSF know about broader impacts activities? And here I actually do have some perspective from my time at the agency. And the answer is there is no magic and it's really, really hard. One way that we know is through project reports. These are the reports that PIs are supposed to be submitting as they go through their award cycle and then at the end. These are limited first by what the PI chooses to report. They are limited by the duration of the award. So anything that happens after the end of the award, we don't necessarily learn about. And they are extremely hard to aggregate. NSF was putting a lot of resources at the time I left the agency into a project to try to make these all machine readable, searchable, and put them in a form that we could aggregate them. This example at the left, NSF gave Duolingo its wings. For years, nobody knew this. And the anecdotal story I heard from somebody who should know, is that somebody in the Directorate for Engineering was going through all the old project reports, and found in a final report from 2011, some PI said, "Oh yeah, by the way, we started this startup called Duolingo." And of course, there was a lot of sleuthing and homework that had to go on, but that was how we, meaning the agency, discovered the connection there. Until that, we didn't know. Another way is through data linkages. We have some tools internal to the agency, and you may have some of them at your universities too, that allow us to link NSF awards, not just to publications, but to patents, policy documents, research data sets, media mentions, social media, and other types of outcomes, as well as student outcomes. So one example of that is ETAP, the education and training application. And don't worry about the numbers on the thing on the right, but basically it's supposed to show that some of the outcomes that have been derived from participants who in the ETAP system by linking their data with other data sources like IPEDS and the National Student Clearinghouse. And then I would not discount the importance of anecdotes and interpersonal communication between from PIs and others with program officers and leadership. But like I said, this is really hard. I thought this was really interesting as part of the Merit Review Commission report. They did a survey of NSF staff, and one of the findings was only 39% of staff respondents reported the data collected were somewhat or very effective at helping assess whether funded projects support NSF's mission to benefit society. There is a similar question we can ask for the recipients of those funds and those that advocate on their behalf. The answers here are similar too. They use federal and proprietary data sources. They use data linkages. This here is from the Institute for Research on Innovation and Science at the University of Michigan, which links grant data to universities, to student outcome data, and to purchases off those grants, and to information about the companies where those purchases are made. Um, Ad hoc surveys, sometimes performed by societies or associations, often in response to something that's going on in DC or federal policy. And then a lot of work by some of the parts of the university, especially public affairs, vice presidents for research and federal relations. What I put here on the right are some examples that I found recently of major public research universities that have set up sort of online fronts for showing the impact of their research, showing how the things that they're doing are actually benefiting the community, the state, and the nation. And these are the sorts of things that are growing in this environment right now because it's becoming more and more important to tell these stories. So the take-home messages from my presentation: broader impacts are important to NSF and to the research community as a whole, and they are only growing more so. Developing and evaluating broader impacts poses continuing challenges for NSF, and it's hard for PIs. Broader impacts exist in a place of a lot of tension between promoting the progress of science and demonstrating returns on taxpayer investment, tension between what you can reasonably expect from a single study versus the desire to quantify aggregate benefits, tension between how long a single award goes for, 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years, versus how long it takes some of these impacts to come about. Tension between the outcomes and products that we're used to measuring and evaluating, maybe not very well, but for instance, with bibliometrics, and others that are incredibly hard to measure. And then tension between competing incentives faced by PIs at their institutions, who may not get a whole lot of credit from the tenure process for engaging in some of these broader impacts activities. So for individual proposals, broader impacts require a thoughtful approach. They're also a shared challenge where guidance and collaboration can help. As promised or threatened, I have this slide here, which has a bunch of links to most of the things that I referenced in the presentation if you are interested in digging a little bit deeper. And with that, I will stop and turn it over to Joseph.
Just 1 second, Josh. There is a question for you in the
Okay.
Q&A box before we turn to Joseph. What are the common mistakes researchers make when writing broader impact sections?
Um, I think different program officers might have different views of that. I would say, over promising is one that I saw where it's just not credible. Another one that I saw was treating things that are basically just part of the job you should be doing already as broader impacts. I'm going to present my work at a conference. I'm going to take on a student. Like that's not a broader impact. You should be doing that anyway. Um, yeah, so I guess kind of erring in the two extreme directions were the most common things that I saw in my experience.
All right, Joseph.
Okay, thanks, Josh. That was great. Um, Now I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Screen share. Okay, so it looks like everyone can see that. All right,
Yes.
so I found myself chuckling listening to Josh's presentation because his is like the meat, and I think mine is going to be more dessert. So, so thanks for that. Thanks for that hearty meal, Josh. Now it's time to sweeten the palate a little bit. So, um, my part of the presentation will be focused on engaging with the K through 12 STEM education community and how that ties into NSF's broader impacts criterion. And okay. And so why is this even a thing, right? Why do we even need me to come in here and talk about something like this? Because really, at its sort of bare essence, this is a story about communication. Um, or what you're going to find out more so is miscommunication between the scientific community and the broader community at large. All right. So I'm gonna talk a bit about how those miscommunications came about or come about or have sustained themselves, and then how researchers can then utilize certain tools or certain ideas to to make their outreach to K through 12 even more substantive. All right, so once again, like I had mentioned before, this is a story about communication, and you have to really think about, well, what does communication mean to you, or what does miscommunication mean to you? All right, and once you realize that, and people in the scientific community seem to seem to have forgotten what it takes to communicate with others. And that's really the crux of the matter of why we're coming to these the these crossroads of people not reaching the other aisle, shall we say, for lack of a better term. All right. And so I know that research suggests that we are becoming more scientifically literate in this day and age. The eye test suggests otherwise. And as our society seemingly becomes less scientifically literate, the importance for clear communication arises. So and you can go as far or as near as COVID-19, for an example. How the how the greater public at large really had a seeming distrust of the scientific community, whether that came above or through the political climate. That's 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 an opinion for you to assess. All right. And so other reasons for scientific miscommunication is a two-way street. This is combating public mistrust of scientists, or scientists themselves not agreeing with the beliefs of others and being very steadfast with that. All of these things can make what I call the flat Earth people have a greater voice. And then we end up getting to a West Side Story, Sharks versus Jets type of confrontation here. All right, so how does what I just said translate to broader impacts and the desire to involve K through 12? So, my personal experience began with when I left the K through 12 classroom, or actually, I'm gonna rewind previous. Before I went into the K through 12 classroom, I was a scientific researcher for the government. Then started my K through 12 education career. Then that brings me to being an Einstein Fellow at the National Science Foundation. So I had this really sort of unique perspective that I could see different vantage points of what broader impacts could be and some of the shortfalls and shortcomings of the scientific community in fostering those broader impacts, right? And so when I when I first reported to molecular and cellular biosciences, which was my division, um, it was quite interesting. I had researchers, approaching me and saying, "Hey, I really want to reach out to K through 12, but I don't know how to because this is very important for my broader impacts of my research study." And I found it fascinating because, it goes back to one of those old adages. It's 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 so much about who you know. Because what I found out as a lab rat myself, as a researcher, and then as an educator, most researchers who have ease in connecting to K through 12 either had children themselves who are in K through 12, had someone in their lab who had children themselves who are in K through 12. And so it was basically like, oh, I'm going to reach out to my child's teacher. And that's going to be the crux of that's going to be the basis of my broader impacts is I have a ready-made audience at my kid's school, this, that, and the fourth, or one of my members of my research team does, or if you're really lucky, you actually have a K through 12 a K through 12 school on your education campus. I remember distinctly having a conversation with uh, with one of the researchers at UPenn, and he was definitely afraid of reaching to K through 12. And I said, well, don't you have a school on your campus? And he said, yeah, I just don't know how to reach them. And so that's when I knew that there was a communication issue, like it was impossible for him to go outside of his building to walk to the K through 12 and talk to the principal there or the science director or even a teacher. And so I said, okay, so we're having some communications or miscommunications in this area. All right, so known and effective strategies to broader impact building, and this really sort of overlaps on some of the things that Josh was saying. Was for a researcher, you need to identify a broader impact activity that addresses obviously one or more of NSF's target outcomes, right? So is that improved STEM education? Is that full participation of women and minorities, or is that improved well-being of individuals in society? You have to identify that first. Once you identify that, then you identify your appropriate target audience. And so this is more of I haven't drilled down to K through 12 yet because this is more broad here. Um, Once you do that, communicating how your broader impact activities are original, creative, and potentially transformative. Now, this sort of bleeds into the fourth, which is develop a plan with those ideas, but make sure it is realistic and rational. All right. And what I saw with my eyes, which I was able to sort of bring certain research ideas down to earth. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work. You're not going to be able to get 100 kids out of their classroom for 6 months out of the school year. And that just sort of lent to the the gulf in where these researchers were in their in their aims and goals with where reality was in the K through 12 space, right? And then lastly, vet in detail the qualifications and the individuals conducting the BI activities. So, what are some examples of K through 12 partnership? I identified 10 examples. There are more, but I identified 10 that are usually fairly effective when you are looking at the broader impact side of your application. All right. One, hosting professional development workshops for teachers. Um, if you do not like, if you as a researcher are phobic to children, you can always deal with the teacher side of K through 12. It might be easier for you because they're adults. It might not be. So we'll see. Visiting K through 12, K-12 classrooms to talk about or demonstrate your research, bringing K-12 students to campus, a day in the life of type thing. And that could be either a day or that could be small term internships for your students. I was fortunate enough as being a biotechnology teacher in DC, we were able to place several of our biotech kids into research labs at Georgetown, at Howard, at GW, and so in which they were actually doing, like real research. Oh, I almost forgot Walter Reed, that place too. So hosting events in your lab, all right, having people setting up field trips for groups of students and teachers to come into your lab to see what a working lab looks like or what research consists of. And then designing curricula for K through 12 classrooms. That's always a sticky wicket, to use a cricket term, in my opinion, because you as a researcher, you really have to be super tightly involved in with the education community to actually design curriculum. All right, but it is an example of K through 12 partnership. And now, continuing with those examples, um, incorporating innovative uses of technology in media and teaching. All right, I have seen this before. Some of the grants that were funded immediately had this really rich combination of utilization of technology and with classroom teachers and students. All right. Next is offering workshops, programs, or lectures to the public for free, and I emphasize for free because uh, free 99 is the best price that anyone can pay. So you don't want to, as a researcher, start charging people for your time. That's the quick way to really turn people off. Participating in digital libraries, podcasts, or blogs. This is a really sort of, if you have the technology, this is a cheap and dirty way to engage K through 12 because you don't actually have to leave your office or classroom. You can record some blogs with some experts and then put it on YouTube, and that counts as reaching out to K-12 and broadening participation as well. Creating public facing resources and or exhibits in collaboration with museums and cultural institutions, which is sort of a wheelhouse that I care greatly about, which is informal and non-formal education. um, and then developing a citizen science project. There are several examples of citizen science projects that I used as a teacher that came from actual funded research, funded NSF research, using citizen science to help collect your data, analyze data. Very, very, very informal, but very powerful, right? And so, once again, we go back to this key component of communication, right? And it is a known fact that educational attainment increases, unfortunately, so does social segregation. This is unfortunately a thing that people deal with as they go higher and higher in their educational goals. So as a result, communication suffers. I heard the term that I truly like. They call it the diploma divide. Okay, so how does how are people trying to combat that diploma divide? And so I found one example, and there's a story behind this example. So you may laugh, you may not, but so others have recognized how this is done. So does anybody remember this guy? His name is Alan Alda. He was an actor. I mean, he's still with us. He's 90 years old. He's an actor, mainly best known for his role as Hawkeye Pierce in MASH. But what I didn't know until I got to the National Science Foundation is that he is also an author, a citizen scientist, and a philanthropist. And so where this ties in is this. As soon as I got to NSF and started my fellowship, I started hearing Alan Alda's name come up, and imagine I was like, what do you mean, the guy from MASH, or the guy from See You Next Year? I don't understand. And a few years prior to that, he actually started this professional development consortia in communicating, having scientists communicate with the regular public. And it was very well funded, and ended up being partnered with Stony Brook University. And I thought it was quite fascinating because, once again, me coming from the K through 12 space, like me, or me having a foot in K through 12 and a foot in high level scientific research, it was nothing for me to cross those boundaries. And then to see the hardships that some scientists had just communicating their ideas to the general public, and then understanding on top of that how that can really cause issues in society down the line. And so here's Alan Alda from MASH, and he developed this in 2009, developed the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook University. All right. And what he did is he recognized that clarity and empathy in scientific communication was not only necessary for public understanding, but imperative for buy in for scientific solutions. And it wasn't until I actually saw him speak on this, I said, "Oh my God, I think he's onto something." And understanding that clarity and empathy are teachable skills. So he trademarked this method. It is grounded in actual science, social science, and communication research, and it has been quite successful in the past. Let me see, 2009. That would be about 16 years, 16 years of 16, 17 years of existence. And so I put this picture in here because at that time I had younger kids who were of Nemo age, and once I started hearing about this Alda method, all I could think about was the scene from Nemo with the fish are friends, not food, and picturing these scientists in a room, saying stuff like, we can talk to regular people. Regular people can be communicated with. And so I had to put that in there because I thought it was really funny. But this is just one example of how that that miscommunication issue between scientists and the general public leads to issues with K through 12 outreach and broader impacts, and how you can solve that. And so, with that being said, we ask that as heroes, what can we do to contribute? What can we do? Who are we as Alan Alders of the world? What can we do to help bridge this gap that between the scientific community and K through 12 to increase their strength in their broader impact section of their grant applications. And with that, I'd just like to open up for questions.
And you'll see here on this closing slide two QR codes. One links to our QEM events page where you can find information about other webinars. The others is the Heroes webpage where you can look at all of our research fellows profiles and learn to connect with them. And we do have a question that I think pertains to both sections of the presentation, which is what strategies can be used to assess and document the outcomes of broader impact activities?
What say you, Josh? And then I'll give my 2 cents.
Well, I hope this doesn't come across as as a hedge. It piggybacks on what some of what you're saying, Joseph, which is I would offer advice. Don't discount and devalue stories and anecdotes. Because when you think about how ultimately a lot of these broader impact information is going would be used, it would be used in the form of a story or an anecdote. Either because you're trying to persuade somebody of something in a communication type of way, or you're putting something out there on the web to try to communicate the value of the work that you've done. Um, Let
That's
me
a
just leave
great
my
point.
answer there. Yeah.
No, that's a great point, and I'll actually go back to what something that you said in your presentation concerning just with in this day and age, in this communication day and age, it's a lot easier now to blow your own horn, to tout what you are doing and how you can record what you have done in that collaboration with that K through 12 space, whether it be through your university, most labs I know and universities have their own websites. Like that was, that's like there's the so and so lab, and you can literally record and talk about and embed videos of your research, of your broader impacts examples. And so I would, for lack of a better term, I would utilize the communication avenues that are present to all of us right now. Don't reinvent the wheel when it comes to presenting what you have done in your lab. Once again, it goes to it's a fascinating thing because not many scientists are prima donnas, and so it's hard for a scientist to say, hey, look at what I'm doing. But in terms of getting your research funded, you kind of have to do that. And so it is one of those things where you, as a scientist, may have to go outside of your comfort zone and be public with what you are doing, that outreach. Because once again, if the outreach is genuine and it's effective, then people should know.
Now, this might be more oriented to the first half of the presentation, but have there been any changes to the NSF broader impact specifically for 2026 proposals?
So I'll do my best based on what I presented was my sense of where things are. Just keep in mind this is um one person's sense. I think that the update to priorities that I talked about that came out in 2025 is a recent guidance. The latest version of the PAPG that I saw is from 2024. There were some supplements to it. I looked through those the other week and I didn't see anything that was specific to broader impacts. The merit review report from December that I talked about, that is a report with recommendations. It would be up to the National Science Board and NSF leadership to operationalize those. And I'm sorry if I sound hedgy at all. It's just I want to make sure that I'm not speaking with more authority or up to the moment information than I have.
Participants are welcome to raise their hands and ask questions live, as well as putting questions into the Q&A box. Okay, Gulnaz Javan is now spotlighted. Please ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm sorry, I'm in the forensic science meeting. It's a little bit crowded, but thank you so much. Nice information. When I look at them, especially recently it's changed for NSF NIH format. And when I look at them, they are renamed for societal benefits. They are using couple documents. So what do you know about this? Instead of broader impact, they are using societal benefits. So do you know anything about this? And thanks for answering all my questions as well. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that December report from the NSB Commission on Merit Review recommended that NSF rename broader impacts to societal benefits. And so they may, and again, I'm now kind of speculating, they may be starting to make that substitution in some of the things that are out there. But officially, as we talked about, the name can't be changed without some congressional action. But I think that importantly, it's important to recognize that at least this group that put out this report is seeing that when we use the word broader impact or the phrase broader impacts, we are really talking about societal benefits. So I hope that is a helpful answer.
Yes, thank you.
We have about 7 minutes on the clock if anyone else has more questions. And once again, I'd like to direct you to these QR codes here on the closing slide. First, you can find Josh and Joseph's email addresses with QEM. Feel free to reach out to them. And the QEM events page, which lists our upcoming webinars, is accessible here, as well as the Heroes webpage, which lists profiles of our heroes. And another question is congressional action really needed to change names? Did they need that at the War Department?
Look, there's changing names and then there's changing names, right? As the last question implied, they may already be starting to change the terminology that they use. My point was that from a purely legalistic point of view, not that I'm qualified to be legalistic, because the term broader impacts was codified in the America Competes Act, and they did that in part to make sure it didn't go away back then. To really, really change the name officially, they would need Congress. But there is plenty that they can do in the absence of that.
Yeah, sure.
Well, thank you so much for your attendance today. We really appreciate you partaking and participating in our webinar series. Please feel free to register for upcoming webinars. We would love to see you again. Thank you so much. Thanks to
Thank you so much, Dr. Wood. Enjoy your day.
She's gonna drop